What's going on, everyone? It's Simon from UofTearless, and welcome to Save the Semester Q&A. Not too long ago, I put up a poll on my Instagram where a bunch of you asked questions on how to succeed during finals. So I'm going to be going through each of these questions one by one and giving you my response. Currently, I feel like I'm just passively learning the content. The study techniques I use aren't improving my grades either. There are so many different aspects and I'm not connecting, and even mind maps aren't helping. They feel messy and confusing, and reviewing just doesn't really make things clearer. A lot of the time it feels like I'm filling in information without actually learning. Nothing is really clicking and I can't seem to piece everything together. This one doesn't seem necessarily like a lack of knowledge problem, but more of a lack of context. So what happens when you learn is that you build this mental web. And the way your brain puts something from short-term memory into long-term memory is by connecting it to things that you already know. Because you need to make something new meaningful in order to get it into long-term memory. So when you go about learning any class, you usually have a general understanding on what the class is going to be about. I think one of the easiest ways to go about learning any course is to actually go through the syllabus, know what you're going to be taught, and then go into class. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the topic of each lecture, because this is going to help me categorize all the information so that I don't have to guess where it's going to go. Usually courses are taught in a specific order, and so if you know what the order is going to be, it helps you create a timeline and stick information in that you learn along the way. When you say passively learning, I'm assuming that you kind of just sit there and either take notes on what's going on in lecture, or you just rewrite your notes or rewatch lectures when you're studying. These methods themselves aren't necessarily bad. The problem is you're only preparing to learn the information. So once you rewrite your notes, you have to do something with it. You have to actively engage with the material. And the best way to do this is honestly just through practice questions. There are old exam repositories that you can look through, but if that fails too, you can always just make your own. And I guarantee you that you will start learning before you even answer your own questions. So to summarize this point, first up, make sure that you have that mental skeleton so that you actually know what you're going to be learning and you can fit pieces of information in. The second thing is that after you're done passively learning the information, I would then go ahead and make your own practice questions. I think that's probably the fastest way to learn, especially if you don't have a lot of time before the exam and there's just too much to review. Understand the broad concepts because you'll be surprised how much you can infer on the exam. The next category we're going to go over is finals pressure and struggling. The first question is, how do you study for back-to-back finals of completely different subjects? Great question. I struggled with this so much in first year. Funnily enough, there's a phenomenon where if you actually study more than one subject in one sitting, you'll remember it better than if you just sit down and study one subject to death and then study the next one and then study the next one. So let's say you had 3 chunks of time that you were going to study throughout the day. If each one, let's say, is an hour and a half of studying, I would do 30 minutes of one subject, 30 minutes of the next, and 30 minutes of the next. Not only is this going to allow your brain more time to ruminate over time, because you are studying multiple subjects in one day, but you'll just be studying for less time on each of those days. The reason it's so much better is because you actually study the content in more contexts, as in like your external environment. So that's why it's really important to study a little bit of each subject per day, but not just per day. You want to even break it down further to study a little bit of each subject in the different parts of the day. This also means that it's going to be harder to switch between topics. And you'd think this would be bad, but when something requires more cognitive load, it requires you to give it more attention and you actually remember it better. And you could probably study all 5 of your classes every single day and you'd still do pretty well. I'm assuming that your classes do not have finals back to back, as in like you go straight from one exam to the next, but like you still have a little bit of time. So take like an hour off, let your brain recharge. Don't do anything stimulating, just sit and like get bored. To summarize everything I just said into like 2 sentences, first, make sure that you're studying for more than one class every time you sit down to study. And second, make sure that you actually take a break after your exam and don't go straight into studying, because your brain is going to be tired and it's not going to work as well. Next up is, how do I decide what's most important to study at a given time and what subjects should I focus on first? Great question. When do you have the most energy? If you are a morning person like I am an extreme morning person. I always study the hardest class first, and then as my energy tapers off, I will study the easier classes later in the day. Instead of studying the hardest class first, 4 days out from my first final, I will then put my attention in the morning towards whichever class has the final first, and then I go in chronological order based on when the finals are, not by how hard the class is, because I don't want to go through a flashcard and then accidentally like say that I knew something that the interval's in 5 days, but the final's in 4, and so I won't see it again before the final. and then that ends up being on the exam, I want to make sure that I've nailed every single flashcard before the exam so that I can't get it wrong when the test comes, instead of just kind of like going through it. But yeah, the most important time to study is honestly, it's really up to you. If you're an evening person, by all means, take the evening and focus on the hardest class. Just whenever you have the most energy, do the hardest thing. And when you have less energy, do an easier thing. That's a general rule of thumb. Don't know what to prioritize and when? Time division 2. This one probably would be easier to do at the beginning of the year. In all honesty, like I would usually take all the syllabi and I usually will write down every assignment that's due on a calendar, and I will color code it to a specific class after going through the syllabus. In terms of going through the syllabuses, I wouldn't even bother. I would just go through the lecture material and the textbook. Next is time management struggles. How to manage study time so that you're not taking too long on assignments, reports, etc. This one depends on which one is worth more. If I have an assignment that's worth, let's say, 10%, and my final is worth 35, honestly, spend a third of the time on the assignment and 3 times more on the final, because that's going to be worth a lot more of your grade. If you have multiple, just go in descending order from whichever is most important to least important, and factor in the deadlines too. Like if you need to get the assignment in, just do the assignment and then study later. Next one, not enough time to practice. There's enough time. There is a lot of time. It's just, I think a lot of people trick themselves into thinking that they need to be at the library for a very long time to study. But I highly encourage people to try setting a timer when they study and pause it every time you get distracted. You will very quickly realize you do not study for as long as you think you do. There's a lot of dead time that you don't realize. And transition time too. One way to get back a lot of your time is to just stop walking back and forth between places and just stop procrastinating. Because honestly, there's no better use of your time than working on the most important thing, and there is no boost in productivity that is greater than going from 0 to infinity, which is the time you go from not working to starting. The next topic is burnout and lack of motivation. This one is going to be a big one for a lot of people, especially during finals. How do I have motivation to study for 6 finals after you've only done 2? You start losing it. Honestly, sometimes you just have to do things that are hard. For my people at U of T, we are at a hard university. A lot of the time, I think we forget that, and we forget that it is okay to feel burnt out and to feel tired and to not have motivation. This is what hard feels like, and that is okay. It is not easy to be a student. It is not easy to manage your time. It is not easy, especially today, to limit so many distractions. It really just comes down to sit down and do the work, because there is no way around it. You can't prepare to do the work and expect the work to be done. You just need to do it. I have this quote that I say to myself often, and it's go until the bell. And what that means to me is just work until the work is done. Just remember that the time before your final is infinitely more valuable to preparing for your final than time after your final. So you can rest after your finals, but you can never take time from after your finals and put it in front. Next question, I think I prepared well enough, then the night before I realize I'm doomed. I relate to this so hard. I think we've all gone through that. I think the way to realize that you're not prepared earlier is just to do a bunch of questions, like practice questions earlier. That is the fastest way to tell that you are not prepared. Because when you start studying, you're gonna think you know everything, you're gonna take a practice test, and you're gonna realize you know nothing. The benefit of this is that there is an overcompensation effect. And so when you think that you're really bad at something, you will actually give so much more attention to those things you got wrong that it'll be extremely hard to forget them, more so than the things that you got right on a practice test. Do practice tests early. Don't wait till the last second, because that's gonna make it extremely stressful for you, and you're probably gonna know too much, and then you won't give enough attention for the practice exam. I would recommend 3 to 5 days before your exam, do a practice test, and then do one every day if you can. And if you don't have enough questions, make your own. Still didn't start studying for a bio exam, and it's in 2 days. This was also sent in 2 days ago. I hope you did well. Although one good piece of advice I can say to this is that any task that feels really scary, just break it down so small that your brain barely even perceives that it's going to require energy. So for example, if I were to write an essay, just open your computer, then sit there and maybe even turn it on. Then like go and open up Google Docs or Word and just start a blank sheet of paper and write your name and student number on it. Doing the work is not actually the hardest part. The hardest part is thinking about doing the work, because that's when you psych your brain up to get ready to expend a bunch of energy, and your brain is like, hell no, right? Because it wants you to be comfortable. And so if you actually just start, all your brain's thinking about is what the work is, not doing the work. And so if I were to start writing an essay, I'm thinking about what word comes next, not how many words do I have to write. But if you start and you just tell yourself you're only gonna do a teeny little bit, it's probably gonna be pretty easy. So just say, I'm gonna sit down, I'm gonna do one slide. The next category is stress, fatigue, and procrastination. Sticking to a plan and not just getting stuck in analysis paralysis. Yeah, that's what I was saying about making things as easy as possible. So break something down so small that it's very hard not to keep going. Just say like, I'm gonna work for like 5 minutes. Maybe I can work for another 5 minutes, maybe another 5 minutes. Procrastination comes from expecting something to take a lot of energy. And so if you kind of minimize that expectation, so instead of I'm gonna study for an hour, just say I'm gonna study for 5 minutes, and then 5 more, and then 5 more, and then 5 more. The next question, freezing because I don't know how to organize the stuff I need to do. Make a plan. And as easy as that sounds, just knowing what you have to do is half the battle. So if you just make that a task, like say, I'm gonna sit down and I'm not even gonna do the work. I'm just gonna write down that I have to do it. A lot of the time when I'm really procrastinating an assignment, what I'll do is I'll just read the instructions, because that takes a lot of the guesswork out of it. A lot of the analysis paralysis and the procrastination comes from not even knowing what you have to do. And so there's this unknown that's scary, and that's what causes anxiety, is fear of the unknown. Finding the discipline to lock in, and it's kind of tough to structure review. I think discipline to lock in is a little ridiculous. If you're locked in, so to speak. It's not from discipline or motivation, it's just lack of other things to do. If I were to sit myself down in a room with nothing there and a computer with only an essay to write, eventually I'd just be so bored that I would just start writing the essay, or at least something. So I think discipline for locking in my opinion, is more about removing distractions rather than forcing yourself to work super hard and ignore things. And so if you create an environment where there are basically no distractions, it's gonna be pretty easy to do the work. Brain fog tips, and also how you time your caffeine if you do drink coffee. Get a lot of sleep and drink a ton of water and actually eat consistently. That will fix probably most of it. The rest is just burnout. Burnout comes from not seeing results for the work that you put in, and it seems like a waste of energy. And so your brain is telling you, why would I keep putting in more energy if I'm not gonna get anything for it? But timing off caffeine, I usually take it an hour and a half after I wake up. The reason for this is because your cortisol rises when you wake, and actually before you wake. And it takes about an hour and a half for the cortisol to bind to all of the receptors. And this allows you to feel alert, but caffeine also binds to the same receptor. So to summarize this, make sure you sleep, you drink enough water, and you eat enough food. And then for caffeine, make sure that you wait at least an hour and a half before having it. It doesn't raise your ceiling of cognition, it just stops you from bottoming out. Next up, procrastination. I can't get enough dopamine boost from studying, and I don't know why it's like this, because I used to love studying. This happens probably because you're burnt out. One of the easiest ways to fix this in studying especially is just to practice test yourself to death, because then you will see a raw score of how you're improving, and if you're not improving, you'll at least know what you're getting wrong. I would say that one of the biggest ways to get out of this kind of anhedonic state, which basically means you don't really feel anything, every now and then just throw in something random, new, fun. I'm a big proponent of actually enjoying life. I only do so much work because it's what I like to enjoy, and a lot of people don't understand that, but that's okay. But I hate studying. I hate doing school. I like to do my own work. And so studying in school for me is never fun. And if I only did that, it would just be monotonous. I'd feel like garbage. And so the preventative measure is kind of just to get more sleep. But the way to fix it is that every now and then just throw in something random, spice it up, get that pattern interrupt. It won't solve everything, but there are ways to make it better. Hopefully that helps. All right, next category, tools and study resources. Find doesn't work anymore. Better alternative or tutorials. So this was a reference to one of my most popular videos. Find is a AI tool that you can use that cites its sources from the internet. It can help you learn faster. And so a really good tool that I use now is Perplexity. Perplexity is very good and it cites its sources and it does not hallucinate. And so if you want to go back and read the original documentation of things, you can do that really easily. It's called perplexity.ai, and it is a great tool. I use it all the time. This is from one of my friends, an educator perspective. I need to grade them, and they're all so bad. Did students even study? I'm sure they studied. I just don't think they studied well enough. For my Chem 136 final on Monday, should I be focusing on practice problems or review? Practice problems are probably a good way to start. Make sure you know what you don't know. And then once you've done enough practice problems to where you're pretty solid on what you know and what you don't know, start reviewing the stuff that you don't know, and then do more practice problems. So neither one or the other, do both, but first start with practice problems. You can get it through brute force memorization. It's not effective enough to where you're gonna be able to apply it to everything. So yeah, practice problems like your life depends on it, and then review what you got wrong. Anyway, that's all for today. If you guys have any more questions, leave them down in the comments below and I will try to answer them for Save the Semester Q&A Part 2. If you guys want it, and I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.